Welcome, everybody. My name is Tommy Soros. I'm Assistant Director of the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology, and Infectious Disease. And today I'm Pathfinder. I have the pleasure of introducing Chad Johnson, who's a senior research scientist at Cook Regentec. Welcome to the program, Chad. Thank you so much for doing this. And thank you so much for taking time. As you know, this is a program where we try to capture people's journey and their careers and what's gone on so far. And I'm so interested to hear how your career's gone so far and what it looks like. So welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So I guess maybe we can go back and tell us a little bit about your training, tell us a little bit about your background, your history, what brought you to Indiana, all of that. How about that?
Yeah, very good. I'm originally from Minnesota, from one of the suburbs around Minneapolis. And I did my undergraduate work was in chemical engineering at the University of Minnesota. For grad school, I ended up moving away and going all the way down to Atlanta, Georgia, and got my PhD in biomedical engineering from Georgia Tech and Emory University. It was an interesting time being from Minnesota, making the transition down to Atlanta, very different weather. It was a good time in academics. I worked in a division of cardiology where for my research at Emory, and I got to interact with engineers like myself, but it was mainly scientists and medical doctors. And I got to learn that the languages between those three groups are very different in what they're looking for and kind of how you have to explain stuff. So that was good. My research work was in tissue engineering. When I graduated with a PhD in engineering to begin with, and especially something as specialized as tissue engineering, opportunities are in different areas. So, and not necessarily a lot of jobs that fit my background. So I ended up about halfway home. So I ended up in Indiana, which is almost exactly halfway in weather, in politics, in a whole bunch of aspects between Atlanta or Georgia and Minnesota.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, take us a little bit back to what was it like as a grad student? What was it? What were people that might have had an impact in your life, or some of the lessons learned? Because I know we have a lot of grad students that do watch this program, and they're also thinking, well, should I go down a pathway where I should stay in academia or go into industry? And so, what was it like for you as you were going through it?
Yeah, I can say there's a few things there. At Georgia Tech, for most of my classwork, I would do it at Georgia Tech, and it was mainly engineering based. And so that was again working with kind of this heavy engineering side of things. Georgia Tech, and one of the reasons why I chose Georgia Tech is it's a little bit more known for pushing people out into industry. So they were already kind of training people for industry type jobs instead of with more of an industry type focus than you necessarily get in all graduate programs, where a lot of the graduate programs are teaching for the next generation of academics. So we already had some of that. I do remember kind of then going, like I said, I did my research at Emory University, and the communication and kind of expectations was different there. The division of cardiology was really focused on the patients and how do we do science in order to be able to understand the situation for the patients differently. And there was almost a juxtaposition or a difference between the research I was doing in the division of cardiology and the focus of the division of cardiology, where it was all about how do we translate this, what are we looking for that we can translate into the patient, versus the engineering aspects, which I think a lot of times focus more on the theoretical, like how do we either understand stuff differently, but not necessarily how do we get into the operating rooms and start playing stuff down. So I ended up having a lot of impactful people. We had cardiologists that or medical doctors that were doing their fellowship in cardiology in our labs. And they would be able to tell me about, they had to have a clinical rotation. They would tell me about some of the cases they're seeing and teach me about some of the stuff they're doing. So I had a real kind of good opportunity to learn from some really high quality scientists, including my advisor, and some of these cardiologists that were practicing doctors that were working for their future where they were going to be practicing doctors as part of it, and giving me some of that understanding and perspective.
That's awesome. And do you think that being immersed in that, it seems to me like it was a multidisciplinary environment that you were in, right? Like you had your engineering hat, but you were in the mix with doctors and other research scientists, biologists, I'm sure too, that were in looking at that. Was that, do you think that helped you to be in that mode?
Oh, absolutely. I can say one thing in maybe there was a fair amount of, in going into it, I think I probably had that too. There's a fair amount of hubris or ego with the engineers, thinking that the real problem with all of these medical problems was that the engineers hadn't looked at it right yet. And so that they were going to come in there and fix these problems because, the biologists don't think right.
Right.
And I learned very quickly that engineers are full of themselves. And I probably even needed a little bit of that for my own ego to kind of recognize, biology is different. You can think about stuff in chemistry, you can think about stuff in physics. For in the traditional, right, chemical engineering background that I had, right, we knew stuff. In biology, you don't know anything until you test it out, and even then your test models are flawed. So you learn the next level, and it's not until you get into people, and then it's not until you have experience of it in thousands of people that you start to really understand the complexity and some of the things. So it was it was eye-opening for me to see the realities of it. And the best things we can engineer on the benchtop can't always go into practice because there are things we're missing from that we don't understand about how things work in the operating room or the cath lab. And so, yes, my understanding of a lot of those aspects happened to me in grad school, and I learned enough in grad school that by the time I got into industry, I already had some of those perspectives that I could then bring to the engineers that I would work with closely and say, you don't know, and you can't know some of these things until we try it out. So
but it must have been so humbling an experience too, right? And being
yes,
able to say, no, we really don't
don't
know.
know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I tell the story that when I first looked to going into grad school in 1994, they were talking that they were going to be able to tissue engineer a blood vessel. The days of using veins for bypass surgery are numbered. That in 5 years, we're going to have a perfectly tissue engineered blood vessel that they're going to use for bypass surgery. And then I remember I took some time off from grad school for a little while and went back in 1998. And they were saying in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have an engineered blood vessel that's going to work for this. And I graduated and they're going, 5 to 10 years, maybe 15, we'll have a blood vessel. And now it's fully 20 years later, since I've graduated, and almost 40 and almost 30 years since I first heard the story that we were 5 years away, and we still aren't there.
Yeah.
And yeah, that even by the end of my PhD, I got in trouble with one of my advisors for basically saying, I don't know for sure that tissue engineering is going to win out versus some of the other technologies like drug-eluting stents or other things that are actually making strides in the face of this. So yeah,
Oh,
definitely humbling for me. I don't know for sure that we've gotten enough humbling for some of the rest of the groups, but definitely humbling for me.
so, but Chad, it seems then that you were a vocal scientist, a scientist that was there, that was putting in your thoughts and you're contributing your opinions too. How did you take that? Because I mean, that must have been quite an experience where your prof is like reprimanding you for putting down the field that you're in.
Yeah, it wasn't my advisor. It was actually the head of the department, but he was the guy that got me to go to Georgia Tech for grad school. So he was a very important and very powerful guy in the field. He did and that was in my thesis defense at the end of it when he was asking questions and he said, where do you think the future of this is? I kind of told him he was not happy with me for that answer. He wanted, I think, more of, toe the company line about how we're just around the corner, one more thing and it'll be it. And
5 more years.
yeah, I don't. And he was working at Georgia Tech, and I think he still had that engineering hubris. He had never been, and I see it even with some of the people I've worked with in industry, including some of my bosses, that they never got their hands dirty. They never did the cell culture. They didn't do hands-on the animal experiments. They read the papers, but without that hands-on experience, without having to redo an experiment 50 times to finally get something that you can learn from, beyond that these things don't work. I don't know for sure you ever fully absorb some of that information. So I like to think I'm an engineer by nature. And that's, it's good that I went into engineering, but I learned to become a good scientist. Yeah. And it took me some stuff, but I think it does take some of that humility. It takes understanding that we can't understand everything about biology. So, and that even we put our best theories forward, but we got to test it out and work through it. So, even deep into my career in Cook, people at all levels would ask me, "What's the answer to this?" And my response was always, "Well, I can tell you the best case. I can tell you the worst case thing that could happen. I will tell you it will be somewhere in between that. I can tell you these are the models that we can use to interrogate it, but I'll also tell you those are very flawed. So we really won't know until we get it into people. And then there are going to be people that some of which end up having close to the best case. And some of those people are going to end up having the worst case. And I'm not going to be able to tell you how we're going to figure out which ones are going to do which. So, there aren't simple answers when it comes to the diseases in biology. Yeah. So, and so much of it depends on things outside your control, like the patient, like the doctor that puts in the products that you're working with. So, yeah, it definitely is different.
And I think you said it before, where you have to get your hands dirty. You have to be in the lab and understand what are the limitations and what you can't do, and what's next in that field if you're definitely immersed in it. So, how was that as on your PhD defense day, getting a little heated with with the department head? But so then, what was your purview? Were you applying to jobs while you were in grad school?
Yeah, I was definitely in kind of contact with some companies, and applying for jobs. As I indicated, I think earlier, PhDs in engineering are a little bit different than PhDs in science. PhDs in engineering honestly limit some of the jobs that you can access, whereas PhDs in most of the scientific areas that I've seen help unlock jobs. The problem with PhDs in engineering is that industry normally thinks that they are either too academic minded or too narrow minded, or they want to be in charge on day one. And so there's kind of a different level. Hybrid PhDs, I like to think mine is more of a hybrid, where it's science and engineering. It makes a little bit more sense for the PhDs. But I can tell you more than a few people, and at that time, biomedical engineering still wasn't a full discipline. It had been around as a degree for a few institutions for a few decades, but most research institutions didn't start offering that as a degree until the late 90s and early 2000s as an undergraduate degree. So there's a whole bunch of people that and a whole bunch of engineers that worked in these old companies and said, if I see a project, I see me needing a material scientist, or I see me needing a chemical engineer for drug elution, or I see me needing a mechanical engineer for strut design on a stent. What I don't understand is, why do I need a biomedical engineer? Why do I need somebody who understands biology? Because we don't do biology. We do these mechanical or drug elution things.
Yes.
And we don't think about it in terms of the underlying biology that's happening there. Yeah. So it was actually a challenging time, I think, for me to be considered for jobs and looking for jobs and trying to find that right fit.
And so did you interview at several places? And like, what
I
was did you like have to send out application after, I mean, was there internet? Probably not as readily available as it is now, right? For applying for jobs, or was there?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't as streamlined as it is now. There was still a lot of mailing, like copies of my resume and a cover letter in these things. There wasn't necessarily always good job postings readily available. Some of the bigger companies had that, but the smaller companies not necessarily. And it was a lot more kind of hunt and work through connections and stuff. Most of those things that I sent out, most of the inquiries met to crickets, right? Nothing never came back. It ended up being, I did have a couple interviews. I did have some discussions. There's a robust industry in Minnesota that I kind of wanted to end up with that ended up not happening. But it ultimately took people who were connected to Georgia Tech, in networking for me to kind of get my foot in the door at Cook Biotech. And it ended up being, kind of a very good outcome, but was definitely challenging at that time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I can imagine. And I can imagine it was challenging also because it was a transitionary time or transitional time where, you know, there was starting to be an understanding and adoption of the field, but it was yet not well defined, right? And
Right.
I know we were trying to do a lot here at Purdue to do some of that, and it was an interesting time to see it come about to light. But so then take us back. You're in Minnesota, you get connected, and you're interviewing for Cook Biotech. How was that process like? Did they bring you to Indiana to do the
Yeah.
interviews? And
Yeah.
how was that like?
It was good. A little bit different. I was brought in. Cook Biotech was this smaller offshoot of Cook Medical. They were doing this wild science. They had products on the market, but they were doing this wild thing that was fit more my background. It was tissue engineering. They use pig intestine of all things as kind of their scaffolding or their base material in order to be able to make medical devices, small intestinal submucosa. Um, the interview was interesting. It was me both trying to figure out whether or not I fit in the area as well as would fit for the job. But it had been a couple months since I had graduated, so I was getting a little bit to the point where I was antsy. I need to find something soon. I need to make a decision about whether or not I can get my foot in the door in industry or whether or not I have to do the next stage, which my friends were doing around postdocing. And they weren't yet sure if they were going to go into academics or something else. So it fell there. What I can say is because biomedical engineering was so different at the time, a lot of the big companies, especially if they were thinking, including Cook, especially if they were thinking in kind of traditional ways, were shying away from this. They weren't, number one, they didn't hire a lot of PhDs anyways, unless they wanted somebody who was going to be a lab rat that was going to solve one simple problem for them for the next 20 years. But they were still thinking in the mindset, because they were all these old engineers who came from traditional fields of, we need engineers that have this capability or this capability. And the biomedical engineers just, you understand something that we don't, and we don't know how that fits yet. So it was difficult for me to get the foot in the door in those ones. And that's why I took a company like Cook Biotech, which was this small offshoot of Cook that was doing this wild new thing, in order to, I think, kind of pick up on it and say, hey, this guy's skills might actually be a good fit and can maybe take us someplace.
That's so you just opened up a door that is so interesting to me in relating that story and that transition. And it's this point where you are finishing your PhD and you're thinking to yourself, well, do I need to go do a postdoc, or do I just want to jump and go into industry and to start my career development within industry and what that might be like. And it's such a foreign concept to us because we were never really exposed to industry as we were in academia. All we know is academia. So, what was it like? What do you remember, like particular events or a decision that you thought, oh, this is why I need to go into industry?
Yeah, to tell a little bit more about my story, I always imagined, to me, getting the degree, I always wanted to go into industry. My goal was always to, and I kind of state this, my goal was to go into to working with medical devices, work in the medical device industry, because I wanted to see whatever I did go into people. And even some of the people would, and I wanted to positively affect people's lives by the work that I was doing and being able to unlock some stuff. And I even said that I had the aptitude that I could have gone to med school, but a doctor sees, hundreds or maybe thousands of patients over their career. I wanted to work on medical devices that could potentially be used in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. So not as big of a direct impact, but a potentially much bigger indirect impact. So I always had that goal in mind. For me, the postdocing was, and even the postdocing I would have been looking into would have been more like a postdoc in a pharmaceutical industry, where I would have been working in an area where they actually appreciated some of the science differently than the medical device industry necessarily did at the time. Um, but but the postdocing was more the fallback plan. If I can't find anything for 6 months after really giving it, a good try, then I'll consider that. Admittedly, I didn't want to, I already knew some of the constraints I put on myself also slowed that process down. At that time, I wanted to be in the Midwest. So I didn't want to be, I'm a Midwestern boy by nature. I like the cold. I like the outdoors. I like doing different things. So, but I'm not a East Coast or West Coast or even Southern guy. I had gone to grad school in the South. So I had somewhat limited myself quite a bit. Some of the areas I could have looked, and that would have been probably my next stage, would have been to applying to more stuff in the Boston area or in San Diego or San Francisco, or some of these other parts of the country, maybe even back in Atlanta. But as much as possible, I wanted to stay in the Midwest, to be able to find a job in the Midwest, and that's why Indiana became a good fit.
That's awesome. That's so neat and such a interesting, perspective because there are different motivations why people move around from job to job, move around the country, but that you had, first of all, this beacon of light that you knew you wanted to go into industry, and the reason is because you wanted to make a difference in people's lives, and we hear this over and over and over again that people in industry, yes, they are curious scientists and they still wear the scientist hat, but they want to do something that has an impact in people, and a lot of that's why they end up going there. Not to say that academics are not having an impact on people, but if we look at the pipeline of how a medical device gets made, you guys are at the forefront of making that impact in people, and that must have been so exciting. Tell us a little bit about when you started at Cook Biotech. What was the environment like? What was the culture like? What did you like the most? What did you dislike the most about working there?
I can talk about some of the different challenges. Some of it was still, as much as I ended up in the Midwest, one of the bigger challenges for me was being a single guy moving to what for me is actually a very small town. I know West Lafayette is not small by most of the people who live here standards, but for me, coming out of a metro area of 2.5 million, then doing my graduate work in a metro area of over 4.5 million, coming to an area where there's maybe 100,000 was small, and provided different challenges again as a single guy, in my early 30s. So that was the difficulty. The exciting part about it is Cook Biotech, I think, was about 8 years old when I started. I think that they were spun out of Purdue in 1995. They still had this, even though they had the support of the big company behind them, they were still had this attitude of let's try stuff, let's do stuff, and let's move forward. We're successful in the fact that we have products on the market and we're starting to building up profit, but we're not quite fully established yet. So they were willing to kind of take chances and do stuff that was a little bit more, kind of exciting to work in. And seeing some of that stuff translated. It was enjoyable to kind of come into that situation, to bring some of the perspective of some of the different science, to be able to build up within a couple of years. I think it was about 2.5 years after I started there, I got promoted to manager and then start building my own team. We had already transferred one major project from the research realm into development, where we did a base material change for the majority of the projects. That was my baby. So we got to see some fun stuff. There was also, so we got to establish stuff. We were doing science. We were really trying to learn about it. We were trying to learn about the material, but also about how different things work with the material. And again, some of that almost a hybrid between, it's almost like applied academics in that case. Like we were still learning, and that was a very kind of fun environment. And it's an environment that doesn't exist everywhere. Now I've seen enough. It doesn't exist everywhere in industry. It exists in some of these groups that aren't necessarily that far removed from academics, but also given the freedom because they had the backing of Big Cook to do some of that exploration. So it was fun. There were some of the huge challenges I remember were trying to get information. Getting a paper no longer was just going online and downloading the paper because your institution had a subscription to that journal. I now had to either pay $40 for it, and then you go, I don't know if this article isn't worth $40. I can read the abstracts, but the little details I want to see in there, I don't want to spend that kind of money for something that I don't know what I'm getting out of it. So there was a whole information kind of block there. The other thing is the output is very different. In grad school, you did a lot of experiments, but you didn't have to write up every experiment into a report. Documentation was just very different and a lot more, you start to learn of exactly some of the tedium that is some of kind of the normal job world. So there was a different, so there were some of those different aspects. Yeah. You also, I'd say, you have different controls. There were projects that ended up dying for reasons that had nothing to do with the science, but had to do with kind of the plans. My first job was actually tissue engineering a blood vessel when I started at Cook Biotech. And, for reasons that I kind of mentioned before, we ended up killing it about 6 months into my time there. So now the whole reason why I was hired is theoretically gone. The thing that I felt most confident in is gone. I had a hand in killing it, so I can't claim total ignorance or anything else on that because I helped that pathway happen. But that definitely also was kind of a different thing, and it required yet a new kind of change in mentality, because now we have to make decisions based on imperfect information on products that are going into people, and that mindset is very different than academics because there's kind of not that risk. Yeah. So sometimes we gave up on projects in grad school, but that was for different reasons. Either funding ran out or it was we figured out it was a rabbit hole that wasn't going to lead anywhere. But in this situation, it wasn't necessarily always the science that led you to that. It was sometimes business decisions.
Yeah, and it sounds though like, as you were describing it before, even though the decisions, the business decisions revolved, that there was this nurturing environment for doing fun stuff, new stuff, innovative stuff, and working together. I mean, you said that you moved to become research manager within a 2-year span or 2-year period. do you like how what was it that you did during that time like that allowed you to get promoted that way?
Yeah, some of it was based on the growth there, but I think some of it was they had put me in charge of about a year into, a little bit more than a year into it. They put me in charge of a project that again was trying to make almost a fundamental improvement to how we were doing some of the processing of our material. And we put together an interdisciplinary team that I was the lead for, and we pushed that through in a short period of time. That and me basically explaining at the time that I was still hadn't fully gotten into I hadn't fully kind of grown into the neighborhood yet, the community. So I was still kind of antsy, and I was still wondering what's next and where am I going. So I kind of pushed them a little bit to make a decision relatively quickly. And their excuse was that I'd done so well, kind of running this large scale project. It ended up translating, and that material is actually still being used in that process. It's still being used today for the manufacture of quite a few of their devices. So I think that that's what that gave me the opportunity. There was the growth along with kind of being able to show my work gave me that opportunity.
And Chad, what's that feeling like to know that the process that you implemented, that you innovated on, is still being used today? It's still helping the company. It's a material or it's a process to make the material. Like what's that feeling like?
Yeah, it's still there's a couple early wins in my career at Cook Biotech that still give me some pride. And it's nice to know for me that those things are going on. Now that process that very likely would not have been figured out if not for me. It was, it included some things that I learned in grad school to get us there. It would have looked differently if it wasn't for me at minimum. It um, it now has been in hundreds of thousands of patients, most likely. So, so yeah, I mean that is what I had set out to do, and that is why I had gone into industry and why I did some of the things that I did. One of the biggest struggles in industry is, and you see it actually quite a bit, is working on projects, especially in the research realm, working on projects where sometimes the answer at the end of the day is they're not going forward. And there are people that can spend their whole career in an industry without ever translating anything to the clinic. So having a couple of those wins early on, and then there were other things that I did later on where I started touching every single one of the development projects that went through in different ways, made me help fulfill that need. The whole reason why I went to grad school for biomedical engineering helped me fulfill that need of actually making positive impacts on patients, of getting stuff out there. So
and
yeah, that definitely is right. Allowed me my job satisfaction. Everything after that is essentially gravy as I move forward.
and do you recall like elements of that success? What other than okay, so you led that other project well and it translated well. Now, like, but were there particular elements of your, the way you communicated or the way you interacted with people or the way that you managed people? I mean, what are they looking for when they're looking to promote people within industry?
Yeah, I mean there are different things that lead people into leadership roles in industry. Some of it is, and this is the science of it's kicking on more and more. It's about being in the right place at the right time. Hard work is usually a component, but in and of itself, it's not enough. So you can be a really, really hard worker and just get in a situation. For instance, if you work in a small department and the boss never retires, there's just not necessarily always room to grow. Um, the advice that I think that people give you is find those opportunities. And eventually I moved right to Regentec, a little bit because I was looking for a new opportunity and a new challenge at that time. Um, what you look for in industry, what I always look for in industry with leaders is people that would be, they were the servant leaders. I know that this is a big comment in the military, even is that what you want are the people who aren't afraid to do the work themselves and understand the work and want to work with you, and also teach the people along the ride for that to be able to help with them. So in the way that they say it in the, in the military, examples are more of the, you're more likely to want to follow a lieutenant that's running here, let's go take this hill, follow me, then the lieutenant goes, here, we want to go take that hill, you guys go ahead.
Yeah.
So you get this, you're going to get the people who really want to work for you if you're going to be the one in there doing it. And I always felt like that was an important part of my job, that I wanted to be in the lab working with my team members. I wanted to see stuff. It doesn't mean necessarily doing the whole projects by yourself. And that's the harder part for some of the people, some of the team leads or supervisors, is you might be the best person who can do it the best way, but if you're doing that all the time, then you're not using your resources correctly.
Right.
So, even if you might know how to do it a little bit better, it's much better in the long run if you work with people. But being able to be there and not shirking some of those duties along the way, I know definitely helps. So in showing it. The other thing I can say is that having a positive attitude goes a long way. Part of my life's experience, part of my life's road was working in a grocery store. I started when I was 16, and I used working in a grocery store to pay my way through college. So I have 10 years, and then when I took a break, I stayed working in the grocery store and actually started getting promoted. So I have 10 years of experience in the grocery store as well. But what I learned, especially in my last year, it was in management roles. What I learned in those periods also was that people have a tendency to want to, you're going to make things a lot better if you can put a positive attitude on it, even in the face of crap coming at you. So even in this situation of very difficult situations. And you can earn the respect not by going to everybody above you or everybody around you with problems, but going to them with solutions. So if you say that there's a problem, give them the solution for the problem. If you can lead with it, it's even better. Hey, I did this today. I did this because we ran into this issue. So, and I think I learned that so much in the grocery store that my boss is just, you can figure this out. You don't come to me and keep on saying we're having problems, but eventually you come and say, hey, this is what we did to solve the problems that we were having. Yeah. It goes a long way. It goes a long way into how people perceive you and what they feel you're capable of and everything else.
Yeah.
Anybody can point out problems. The really good ones point out solutions. The great ones already put the solutions into action before even telling you that anything was wrong.
Wow, wonderful. That is so wonderful. What a great way to put it, because it's so true. It brings value to what you do, right? And it brings value to your thought process and innovation, as well as your hard work to implement the solution to the problems, right? Like, you thought about it, you went after it, and you understood that there was a problem. Recognizing that is it's so tough sometimes. That's really, really great. So tell us a little bit. Okay, so what were you doing as a research manager? You were doing a lot of tissue culture. Were you still in the lab? Were you still like working in with groups in the lab?
Yeah, so I ended my time as a research manager in 2015 at Cook Biotech. As a research manager, we were in charge of a whole bunch of things. Some of it was, and I had a team. It wasn't just me, but when I left, we had 2 PhD scientists. I think we had 3 technicians. I had a master's degree research engineer. And then I had 2 test engineers in my group as well. We were in charge of a great many things at that point. We had animal models. For the most part, most of the animal models that we were doing, we were coordinating the work with outside groups, usually at universities, in order to be able to get stuff done. We also had responsibility for doing cell culture tests internally. We were sending out testing for official testing for biocompatibility externally and being in charge of all the biocompatibility for all the products that were going out the door. So we were touching every single development project. We would be providing expertise for our regulatory, for our quality assurance, and for our development teams. And we were at the same time doing a bunch of feasibility projects for next generation, either base materials or even product ideas that we would be managing. So and honestly, not the last, but maybe not, certainly not the least, is we were providing education, not just the education, talking about our different projects and the science of our material internally, but we were training our sales force in order to be able to understand the science of our product better. But I was going out, and others of our group were going out and talking to medical doctors, because again, we're working with tissue and we're making pig tests into a hernia repair device, and and doctors might be a little bit like, this is weird, what's going on? So they brought us scientists in when doctors were training doctors on some of these procedures. So I would end up giving talks to those as well. So the breadth and depth of our responsibilities was significant. And then again, in the last 6 months, we took on testing as well. So we were doing all the official testing. And that was a whole nother thing that I had to learn about, how you do the extreme level of documentation and statistics in order to provide, sample size calculations and all these things that were much more constrained by kind of those things. So it was a very hectic time, but it was also a very rewarding time in many ways to be able to do all these things and touch, again, all these different areas that was going on in the company. Somehow, as to your point, to whether or not when we would run into issues with the cell culture, occasionally I would just jump in and kind of show them some things. And I train technicians, non-degree technicians or associate's degree or bachelor's level technicians on exactly how to do some of these different things, or go in there and do some histology, cut some slides for them to show them exactly how to do stuff, or work through problems with them if they were running into some challenges. But one of my favorite things is I continue to be able to do animal surgery on mice. We had a project going on with Notre Dame, with an individual in Notre Dame. And so once, usually 3 times a year-ish, I would get to spend a couple days going up there, first during the surgery on the mice and then doing the explants as well. So I got my hands on, I still got my hands on, which was a key to kind of keeping me happy as well.
So an engineer that does surgeries on mice.
Yeah, it's even more extreme than that. Is I'm 6'6". So I'm a very large individual, and these mice are, their mass and most of their things are about the size of my thumb.
Yeah.
So you have this person who's overly large, working with this small surgical instrumentation in order to be able to do this surgery. But
boy,
I enjoyed it.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you also enjoyed the capacity or ability to get in there and maybe even show them some of your skill set. Do you think that helped to maybe even gain some respect, but admiration, and build the team by actually going in there and showing them a little bit of what you were anticipating that they would know what to do or how to do in the lab?
I like to think so. I always thought that, again, kind of that, going back to that, wanting to follow a leader that's forging ahead helps. So being in there and showing them what to do, talking with them and getting to know them in those ways, in that situation as well. Not being afraid to get my hands dirty, not afraid to handle the pig test in any state. Again, showed them that, I'm not just a dictator telling you guys what to do, but I'm there with you. And the other thing that I can state, and I think that it has to be true across other disciplines. It's very true for biology or in the realm that we play in. Hands-on seeing stuff for yourself, understanding what those things mean, and being an expert, even if that means, even in running gels, even in other things, when things go wrong, you know how to interpret it differently when you're there, when you're present, when you're paying attention. And it's even, even more important when it comes to histology or some of those things. So learning those techniques helps me translate to when they're having problems, how to teach them how to fix those problems. But it also gives me a different perspective. And some of that you lose when you're just hearing other people telling you what happened. And if you don't have that experience, you don't know how to drill down, like, well, but why did that happen?
Right.
And was it a mistake, or was it something that we should have anticipated? And so there's no substitute to hands-on. Having a lab that was 20 feet from where I worked, or 40 feet from my office, it also helped because it meant that I could go in there on a daily basis and actually talk and interact and make sure it was there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then the team was, I had an awesome team of people at all levels that were very good at what they were good at. And that also helped quite a bit. In the communication lines being open really helped.
And did you get to choose them? Did you get to choose your team?
Yes, yeah, and that's one of the benefits. I've been in situations where you inherit people versus the people you get to choose, and there's probably two reasons for it. One is you're going to you through that interview process choose people that especially once you get good at some of that interview process, you know whether or not they're going to be a good fit for you and the rest of your team. But there's almost an immediate loyalty that I think is hard to replicate when you inherit people. So the people already, I don't know for sure that they think of it that way, but the fact that you're the one who gave them the job makes them like a little bit more ready to accept stuff from you. It doesn't overcome all issues, but it definitely starts you on the right foot.
That's a very interesting psychological point, and I think it's probably very valid too, right? There is a certain sense of loyalty if you know somebody is looking after you because they thought of you and they picked you over somebody else, right?
Yeah, and I think that's probably a two-way street, that you also want them to succeed if you pick them because that was your judgment.
Yeah.
To choose them as well. So I think it works both ways.
And so, Chad, as you were going through, did you have mentors? Did you have bosses that would tell you or teach you some of these things and, show you the tricks?
Yeah, I can say that I my 10 years in the grocery store, I had 5 different store managers, 5 different grocery managers, and at least 15 or 20 different assistant grocery managers or supervisors of different sorts over the time there. So, and it was a very different time for me, right? I'm in college or high school even, and I was learning different things. There are 2 of them that really had a huge impact on my life. Some of the timing, because I was done. I was taking years away from kind of my academic pursuits and my engineering, and I stayed behind. One of them I'm still good friends with to this day. Even though I haven't worked for him for over 25 years now. They taught me so much that when I went to grad school and I went to even in my time in Cook, I recognized some of the differences between bosses. Having such a wide variety of bosses, and this actually helped me even in my academic world, having such a wide variety of different bosses in the grocery store, what I started to learn was each one of them have their own styles and having different supervisors. So some of them, if I wanted to get the work done, some of them I just had to do this one little thing first, and then I could just do what I thought needed to get done. Whereas other ones, they wanted this or they wanted that. And learning how to adjust myself to their styles actually helped quite a bit in my future endeavors, including in teaching, because it turns out that each teacher is wired slightly differently in what they expect or want from their students. And if you can start to show that, if you can chameleon yourself to be able to show that, they're going to like you as a student, and suddenly you're going to do really well. Yeah. And it's not always the same thing. In fact, it oftentimes is very different things. The same thing is true with bosses. The same thing is true with employees. I got a reputation because I would tell my stories is what happened in the grocery store. But in the grocery store, it's so translatable and everybody kind of understands it. We had employees on my night crew that would, if you told them the sky was falling, they would work their butt off to get everything done. Other ones, you say the sky is falling, they shut down. Too much is going on. I'm done. I can't handle this. You tell another one, if you work side by side with them, they're great. other ones you would work side by side with, and they would just get so chatty that they wouldn't work. So each one of those people, you have to give what unlocks their potential. And so I had learned that at such a young age, and in such a kind of different situation, that helped me so much later on in life. And some of it was the different, again, a couple of these people from my past that were really, really good mentors and helped provide some of that. Some of it was them providing me the freedom to try some of these things for myself and learn how to manage that stuff there as well. Fantastic. But that's, again, the golden rule is treat others like you want to be treated, but the platinum rule is treat other people how they want to be treated. Sure. And that's the thing that, I didn't realize that I had learned that, but I had learned that in my 20s from, again, a different life, a non-academic portion of my life.
Yeah,
and I think that it really helped me later on.
It sounds like it did. And we are so easy to not recognize some of those lessons that we had outside of our academic pursuits, right? So now Cook Regentec formed, and you did, how was the transition to it from Cook Biotech?
Yeah, and there was a few things happening there. In part of it, I needed a change. I'd been at Cook Biotech for 12 years. Cook Regentec was this new company that was going to be focused on regenerative medicine, which tissue engineering is intimately related to regenerative medicine, but it's a little bit different in its scope and kind of the understanding of it. In fact, tissue engineering is one of a few things, along with stem cells, that morphed into the bigger field of regenerative medicine. But it gave a different opportunity. It gave me a chance to kind of jump off and do something different. I also chose at that time to take a step back from some of the managerial side of things. And that was a dual-edged sword. I loved that aspect of my job, but being my own scientist where I can kind of be hands-on and do a lot more of the things myself and work forward was also good for the time. So it had also been 12 years with the same boss, who honestly, if I had stayed at Cook Biotech, would still be my boss. An excellent guy. I wouldn't have lasted 12 years underneath him if it wasn't for him and I meshing really well. Yeah. But I need change at some point, and that just wasn't happening in the way that I needed to at Cook Biotech at that time. So I decided to do Regentec. Regentec was focused on more stem cell therapies and also devices that were designed to really unlock that potential. So using some of the Cook technology or even other technologies in being able to get into this field of regenerative medicine and start designing purpose designed tools for regenerative medicine or advanced therapeutics. So it was an interesting time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so it must have been exciting being able to get back into a mode that you were looking for. Was it more lab work then? It was more tissue engineering lab work?
It was definitely more lab work. It was a lot more focused on, again, stem cell therapies or other next generation therapies. And it was a lot of working through how do we design new tests for devices, how do we capitalize on those tests, and then how do we design new devices to be able to do and unlock some of this potential. Regentec also had that feeling, like I indicated with biotech, that when I first started on, they were young and academic and this stuff. But by the time 2015 rolled around, they were far more established. They're a profitable company that was moving forward, that had some of those constraints. Like they weren't willing necessarily to totally change everything because now we have this big portion of our company that we need to protect from change. So Regentec was more back into that entrepreneurial spirit of let's do things and let's try things because we don't have anything yet and we need to come up with stuff. So it was an interesting time.
So and how exciting though to be in a place again where you're able to do some more experimentation. You're in this development mode that seems to follow you. It seems to attract you to these different situations. It seems to me like you like starting something new.
I do.
You like, but all of this is so interesting, Chad. Your understanding of human psychology, for lack of better term, and your understanding of how to work with people and people, but a lot of this coming from an early understanding in the grocery store business, and then applying some of those lessons to let you succeed in industry in this biotech world and your engineering. And I mean, what did you pick up work ethic too, or in that whole piece? I mean,
Yeah.
what tell us.
Yeah, I think work ethic, I think might have even been ingrained before then. So, and right, I don't know, part of the life advice is try to live with your eyes open, be open to experience, and be open to things. My work ethic is I like to be a finisher. I like to complete stuff, which I think goes back to some of my engineering stuff as well. I forge ahead with imperfect information. As the situation goes forward, you make changes based on what you're learning, which also means having your eyes open to learn on that pathway. And that learning on that pathway is that's not just your work life or what you're doing for your projects or these things. It's also your personal life. Live that way. So if things aren't working for you, change them. And that doesn't necessarily mean wholesale changes. You can make tweaks, but find stuff that works and find stuff that gives you, your sense of fulfillment, your sense of pathway. Live with your eyes open. Um, by nature, I like things to be done. So anything that's not done, and also by nature, I'm a problem solver. So I have a tendency to look at, which can get me in trouble sometimes, but I have a tendency to look at any issue that I see and reframe it as a problem and then come up with solutions for that. So even in traffic, it's like, well, if we design this so this way or this way, we can figure, and if people would behave this way, then we'd solve these issues. But it's those are the ways that I'm wired. Hard work, but live with your eyes open. Always be curious. Always be willing to change and try to always improve your understanding and your interactions and everything else.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to unlock stuff.
And so if you had a somebody in biomedical engineering today that was looking to get into this type of industry, what would be some of the major recommendations that you would give to them?
Yeah, there's probably a few. I would say number one, recognize that what you need to do is try stuff. So, um, no matter what you think the solution is, chances are the solution you have in your head isn't going to work. So don't be afraid to try stuff. When you set out, especially in the early stages of projects, give yourself opportunities to try stuff. I would say that in grad school, I had what I like to think of as a very successful 5 years of grad school, but I didn't limit myself to one experimental pathway with one theory that drove everything. I tried a whole bunch of different things. When it didn't work, I transitioned. I did, and I say this, 2/3 or 3/4 of what I didn't work out. That's important. But I had, at the end of the day, I ended up with 10 manuscripts, 4 first author publications and all this because I kept trying different stuff in slightly different avenues. Where I thought I was going from day one isn't where I ended up by the end. But try stuff. Don't be afraid to try different things. Don't be so set in your ways that you get stuck in that rut. For biomedical engineering over other engineering, what I used to give as the advice, I think that the industry is starting to understand this, is engineering and biomedical engineering is very different. If a bridge needs to be strong enough to hold 100,000 pounds, they'll design that bridge to hold 1,000,000 pounds or 10 million pounds or 100 million pounds. And that bridge will last, because even as it corrodes, it'll still be fine. You design a bridge. So you design a hernia repair device that is stiff and strong. I can put a steel cylinder inside somebody's belly. It's going to fail miserably. It's too strong. It doesn't match the properties of the stuff around it. It is not designed to integrate with biology. And so biology is so different because there's a window and you have to understand the constraints on that window. And that window is different in biology than it is in most other engineering aspects. So figure out that stuff and learn. And would say that to anybody, always, live with your eyes open, be willing to learn, pay attention to what's going on, pay attention to the messages that things are sending you. And don't get so stuck, reformulate your theories. I am wrong way more than I'm right. So, but I'm guessing and working along enough that I'm right very often but I'm not afraid to admit it at all when I'm wrong, especially in biology. If you're afraid to admit you're wrong in biology, you've lost the game before you've even started. So.
No doubt. Well, terrific, terrific. Thank you so much, Dr. Chad Johnson, Senior Research Scientist at Cook Regentec. Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. Thank you for being our Pathfinder today.
Thank you very much. This has been an enjoyable experience.
Absolutely. It's been very enjoyable for me as well. And I wish you a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.